After a long day of walking the Malecon and learning more about how much strain the Cuban people were under, I made sure to wind down with a little bit of television. The next day would mostly be a restful day, heading to the beach, and I was curious about what kind of broadcast Cubans are receiving in this country where the internet is so heavily censored. Well, aren't you too? So, on my third day, I take a shower, crawl under the covers, and turn on the TV. There aren't a whole lot of channels. I only ended up on 3. The first thing I watch is this TMZ-style program that has the hosts critiquing the latest antics of Elon Musk. Relatable. Then I switch to the next. It is a broadcast of a national economic forum. Plenty of representatives giving hopeful spins on the situation. You could tell by their faces they weren't all that convinced. Then I switched to another channel, and I was kind of surprised by what I saw. A Spanish dub of a very popular Star Wars show. I have to laugh, you know? Of course, the only program by the evil Disney Corporation that would be allowed to premiere on Cuban soil is the one about rebels fighting against an empire. Andor is a damn good show. At least the Cuban censors have taste. In December 2022, I became the first member of my family to return to Cuba in over 60 years. Getting there was a matter of chance and free will, and involves my family of exiles, 2 decades of living and studying internationally, and a sacred tree. This is the true story behind the making of Havana Syndrome, the fictional podcast.
Today, I can announce that the United States has agreed to formally reestablish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Cuba.
You know there's story going around about the CIA and they're trying to get, sending in the folks to get Castro.
Cuba maintains close relations with Russia and China, providing these actors with influence platforms to foment an anti-American
Florida
agenda.
State Court has ruled on the case regarding temporary custody of Elian Gonzalez.
I think you ought to have that. It's incredible. I don't believe this thing in the world could. I don't think we ought to seriously consider it, but I think you ought to know about it.
The progress that we mark today is yet another demonstration that we don't have to be imprisoned by the past. When something isn't working, we can and will change.
Here I am, heading to a beach in Cuba to drink down some coconuts and rum and enjoy the sea and the sand. That's how y'all imagine Cuba, right? That romanticized Caribbean island vibe with drinks and cigars and pretty brown ladies and easy waves. Maybe gambling and partying into the night. Perhaps you meld it with Miami Beach when you think of that idealized Cuba. All pinks and turquoises and sunset orange. The elite's playground is how some people used to refer to the island. You wouldn't be wrong. There is some of that, for sure. But there is a reason we pull up that image of Cuba when we think of it. And, like many things, we can blame Hollywood.
Okay, so what do you call yourself? ¿Cómo se llama?
Antonio Montana.
We're Americans, man. We love America.
Hey, zip it, Hello Kitty.
Welcome to Guantanamo Bay. You boys like to spoon?
The world premiere family adventure, The Old Man and the Sea, Sunday.
Singing our song all the day
I know. It's an easy target, Hollywood, when critiquing American attitudes and preconceptions of foreign countries. But over the last few years of exploring this topic, of writing Havana Syndrome, and trying to find inspiration for the story, I began to notice a trend in pop culture's references to Cuba. Let's see if you catch it too. My trip to the beach was actually pretty easy. There were a few options I had considered ahead of my trip. I am a sea creature and a Pisces, so there was no question that I wanted to go to the beach while I was in Cuba. It was a question of which beach. There is a popular tourist spot, this isthmus out a few hours east of Havana. But that would mean that half my day would go towards traveling via bus, and I would be leaving the next day in the afternoon. So I looked for something closer. The good news was that there was a local bus that made day trips to a beach only half an hour away. Playa Santa Maria del Mar. Perfect. That morning, I packed up everything I needed into a Cuba-branded beach bag I bought as a souvenir. Snacks, water, my iPad, my headphones, and of course a towel and change of clothes. The bus ride itself was only a couple of dollars. There were other foreigners on the bus too, so I didn't feel like the odd one out. The drive out of Havana was uneventful. I had a row of 2 seats to myself, which was nice. I did a little bit of writing on the way. I had no plans for when I ended up there, just a little bit of reading and writing, and of course, throwing myself into the waves like a giddy child. Like I said, I am a sea creature. The bus let out pretty soon after, and I made my way to one end of the public access beach, near a small restaurant and a line of other sunbathers. The beach was beautiful. The Atlantic Ocean sparkling blue in the late morning. I put my things down and did the first thing I always do when I get to the beach. I walk over to let the water lap at my feet, and I introduce myself. A polite guest. My family raised me well. Of course, I was alone, technically, but I was near others who were slowly making their own way for their beach day. There was a mix of local Cubans and foreigners, but it was a pretty peaceful group, not too crowded, perfect to relax. A few buskers roamed the beach back and forth, selling drinks and snacks and little souvenirs. I got myself a coconut, freshly cut in front of me, and the coconut water splashed with Havana Club rum. Hard life, right? A little while into my lounging, after a dip into the sea, a small group of 3 women made their way to settle onto the beach. They were actually the first group of Americans I had seen on my trip, in fact. The only others I had seen up to that point were solo travelers like me. They set up shop just a little to my right. They were all dressed in white, and I smiled to myself. If you remember, back in an earlier episode, I mentioned why there were folks dressed in white in Cuba. I watched behind my sunglasses as they approached the shore with bouquets of flowers. It was a lovely sight. These Black women dressed in vibrant white, smiling and laughing with each other, reverently placing the flowers into the water, an offering to their ancestors and a shared sense of connection with the divine. Then I saw one of the 3 take a bracelet off her wrist and drop it into the water purposefully. It was a beautifully intricate silver one, I noticed. Another offering, obviously. The 3 of them returned to the shore, and I figured it would be neighborly to introduce myself. I told them that I thought the offerings were lovely, and that I too was appreciative of the spiritual significance. I learned that they were visiting from Chicago. 2 were mother and daughter. She was the one who dropped the bracelet, specially made for the Orisha of the ocean, Yamaya. And the 3rd woman was a friend of the daughter. In the middle of our chatter, we hear music come up from behind us. An old man with a guitar, his smile wide and skin brown and weathered by the sea. He compliments our beauty and serenades us. I'm familiar with some of his songs, to my surprise, and I sing with him. I wish I recorded that, but I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't. This was the Cuba that I had been promised, the one that I know part of my heart longed for, sea and sand and song. I fell a little deeper in love with the island then, even knowing what I knew about that particular fairy tale, or perhaps despite that knowledge. Cuba was neither the heaven nor the hell that was described to me, or fed to me in snippets of popular culture. As I chatted with the daughter and mother, her friend waded back into the water. All of a sudden, we hear a surprised yelp, and then laughter. The friend made her way back out of the water, holding something sparkling in her hand. It was a bracelet. It had caught her ankle while she was wading out into the water. The daughter started laughing, saying that Yemaya must have rejected her offering. Her mother shook her head no, though, and that it was probably Yemaya deciding to tag her friend as well. The friend was a little taken aback. Apparently, she wasn't super into the whole Santeria thing and had been waffling about whether she should get more involved. But this, in just a moment, made her feel something magical had happened. Soon after that, I was getting hungry and I was planning to leave in the late afternoon, so I said my goodbyes to my beach friends, wished them well on their travels, and went to the restaurant for a simple but delicious meal of freshly caught fish and rice. The bus ride back was uneventful. I took some video of the famous fortress that sits on the mouth of Havana's port. I was dropped off in the late afternoon in the Parque Central, where I decided to go for more souvenir shopping and eventually have dinner. I was also really eager to hear some more live music, which really was not anywhere I landed at this point, which was disheartening. I walk around and around, wanting to make sure I could find a place I was allowed to enter, for one, and realizing that all the points on my map, the recommendations, were government-run establishments. I was getting tired of this whole charade, and after a long day, even a pretty relaxing one, I was so over trying to go by the rules. I walked and walked and walked until I found what I was looking for. Music. A bar with live music playing, closer to the side of town where locals were, rather than the tourists. It was an old bar, you could tell, with old polished wood and well-worn chairs and tables. The bathroom had no toilet paper. Thanks, Dad, for the constant reminder to always keep some on hand. And they only served beer and little skewers of chicken. But I sat down, had my beer, and listened to my first live band in Cuba, in a bar that the US government told me I wasn't allowed to patron. It was like the waves, like the ocean calling me. Something that my family knows, and anyone who knows me well soon finds out, is that I love to dance. I also love to dance in places I am not supposed to be. When I was a toddler, barely walking, and my sister was still just a baby, my parents took us to a Greek festival. My mom had taken me out of the car, placed me on the ground, and was working on unbuckling my sister from her car seat. But then, across the parking lot, I hear music. And as fast as my little feet could take me, I bolted towards it. My parents bolt after me, terrified of me running through the middle of a parking lot, but I make it to the edge of the parade. There's a big band marching through, and there is a barricade separating the parade from the crowd. Ha! I laugh in the face of barricades, apparently, and scoot myself under the barricade to dance with the musicians. My parents were embarrassed, of course, and tried to coax me back, but then one of the musicians, a man with a trumpet, noticed me and broke off from his line and played directly to my happy dancing face. If that's not enough to convince you about my nature, or my family's, we have another forbidden dance story. This was after my dad's accident in the mid-90s, when I was around 5 or 6, I think. In 1996, my dad lost his leg in a helicopter accident in Ecuador. That's a whole nother story, though. But why this is relevant was that he worked hard to be able to get back on his feet, literally. And during that time, we were often traveling with him while he was visiting various hospitals for reconstructive surgery and physical therapy. One of these trips, we all went out to dinner as a family. My mom and dad and me and my sister. This was a Cuban restaurant, and they had live music and a dance floor. However, there was a sign on the dance floor that said, "No children." But this is me and my family. And when the owner saw his fellow Cuban man, a father, with his 2 children, dancing on a prosthetic leg he was just getting used to, he let it be. Why am I telling you this? What is the point? Like in previous episodes, I've been good to weave in related trivia about US-Cuba history in the context to my journey. To be honest, this was a difficult episode to write. Not because there was anything difficult to tell, but because I felt a dissonance about this day that I can't quite put my finger on. So let's go back to the beginning. The night before, where I watched Andor for the first time. That was a similar dissonance. But it was a statement, in its own way, about the small ways we rebel against iniquity, injustice. How we laugh and dance our way beyond and between barriers, barricades, embargoes, and borders.
There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this.
In that bar, my joy in listening to that band's song was palpable. Because not soon after they started singing, the lead singer walked over and pulled me into a dance. There it was again. That feeling of finally. After I left the bar, I realized that I had only a $50 bill on me, and I needed to break it in order to grab a taxi back to my Airbnb. The bar wasn't able to. They only accepted the Cuban peso, after all, as a government-run bar. I certainly was not in a state to walk all the way up the Malecon either, again. So I go back to the Parque Central, where I knew a bunch of those old touristy cars would be. You know, the classic convertibles. They would be lined up there, and I figured it would be simple enough to ask one of them to break it. I knew it was a risk. Here I was, at night, a little tipsy, with a $50 bill, about to ask a strange man if he would be willing to help me out with my cash issue and drive me home. I walked up, and one of the drivers said that there was a corner store that would be able to break such a large bill. I hopped into his convertible, along with his buddy, and we chatted excitedly about the World Cup, while I entrusted him with my money to hand over to another stranger and to break it appropriately. Oh yes, I can already hear my parents yelling at me as I recount this. Anyway, he comes back from the corner store with money in hand, exactly what he promised, and off we go. One of my favorite photos I took in Cuba was, it's slightly blurry, and we're heading down the Havana streets back to my Airbnb. It's a really cool frame. I tipped them both generously, not just for being kind and trustworthy in what was obviously a very vulnerable situation, but also in defiance, I think. Defiance in all the ways we are told to be still, to not cause waves, to push people away, to not cross the border, to not walk at night as a solo traveler, to not trust a communist, especially not with your money. Small rebellions, right? I'll leave this up to you, whether that is stupid or brave. For now, sit in that distance with me. I'll be back next week. Thank you for listening.